This video is about to be the best video that you can learn how to catch bass in the month of July. Our anglers on our Bass Fishing Declassified team are about to go over the areas they like to fish, the structure within that area, and then of course their favorite baits to throw in July. Now hey, let's get into it.
Summer has finally arrived in the northern part of the world. We are enjoying nice warm days here, and that means one thing. The month of July is going to turn into a phenomenal deep weed line bite. It's one of my favorite ways to fish if you like to fish natural northern lakes. The largemouth, the smallmouth, they start moving out to deep weed lines, which generally is going to be anywhere from 8 to 18 feet of water, depending on the clarity of the lake that you fish. Just a fantastic way to catch big fish as well as numbers of fish that are set up for the summer period. Now, some of the keys when you're looking for a good weed line is to find an irregularity in that weed line, meaning if you just get on the weed line and go, you might catch a fish here and there, but if you're looking for that big group of bass, you're generally going to find them on an irregularity. So maybe that's a point in the weed line, maybe that's a stretch where the weeds go from super thick to sparsed out, maybe it's an area where you get some rock that mixes in with the weed line. You're looking for something different. A lot of times it could be a funnel in the weed line, meaning you have two weed lines that come close together. Those fish will group up right between them. You just want to find something different. Those are your high percentage areas to fish, because honestly, most of these lakes have grass that rings the entire lake. So you need to break down these giant grass beds quickly, and finding your irregularities are going to be the best way to do it. Now, I've got a lot of different baits that I like to use, but generally speaking, you want something that's going to be weedless, and it's hard to beat just a Texas rigged plastic worm, just like this power worm right here. This is a 7.5 inch in the red shad color, one of my all-time favorites. It's produced a ton of grass related fish for me. Yeah, I like to rig it on, say, about a 1/4 ounce Texas rigged weight, and at that point you're talking about just throwing it out to the edge of the grass, working it through a little bit of grass into the clearing where there's no grass, down the break line, and generally speaking that's all you're doing. But a worm is one of the most weedless presentations. It comes through all forms of grass extremely well. Now, if you're looking to generate some good reaction strikes, let's say the fish don't want a slow moving worm that's kind of just going through the edge of the grass, one of my favorite things to do is work a casting jig, and I'll stroke this down that grass line. So I'll actually throw the jig into the grass, and then I'm gonna rip it hard out of that grass to create an explosion. It just sends parts of the grass moving everywhere, and it just creates a good reaction strike out of the bass. You'd think a jig would get hung up in the grass too much, but in reality, when you really stroke it and you really pop it through that grass, it comes out clean and it generates a lot of really good strikes. The last thing that I like to do if you're fishing a nice, good, clean, deep edge is to use a crankbait. Now, a lot of people probably think that that would be crazy because you've got a lot of treble hooks on this Berkley dredger right here. But in reality, if you've got a nice, solid, clean grass line, you can throw a crankbait right down the edge. Now, if it does get hung up, similar to the jig, you can rip it out, and a lot of times it'll come out clean. But in the summer months, in the month of July, a crankbait can be one of the best ways to work those edges. It's definitely a good way to generate a better average size bite as well, and it's one of my favorite techniques to use during the summer months. Now, I do want to point out a couple other things to look for a good weed line. Generally speaking, I like to fish a weed line that's providing a shadow, meaning I want to fish a weed line. Say if this is the weed line and the sun's right here, it's casting a shadow on the clean side. So a lot of your fish then will come out of the grass and suspend along the side of the grass. That makes them a lot more accessible to the anglers, and therefore it's a great it's an easier way for us to access them. If you're fishing a weed line where the bare portion is sun exposed, the fish generally get into the grass more, and that makes them a little bit harder to target. That's one of the biggest things I can point out anytime fishing weed lines. You want to be fishing the weed line that generally is providing a shadow on the deeper exposed area because the fish will actually pull out. The other key is you want to try to identify a weed line that's got a lot of bait fish in it. It could be shad, it could be lake minnows, it could be bluegill, it could be perch. But generally speaking, your most productive weed lines or weeded areas are going to have a lot of life. If you happen to be fishing down a weed line that you're not seeing any fish on your depth finders, you're not seeing any minnow activity, you're not seeing any life, generally speaking, that's not going to be your best area for bass. If you start seeing a lot of life, your bluegill swimming around, your perch swimming around, maybe you got some bait fish flickering around, those are going to be the areas where your bass are. So you can break down these giant grass flats very easily by looking for the bait and looking for the sun position. Those are two very good tips that will increase the number of bass that you catch the next time you head out to fish a deep weed line.
Okay guys, I love to fish during the month of July. You can catch fish first thing in the morning. You can catch fish midday, which is what I enjoy catching, that middle part, hottest part of the day. And then there's also the evening bite. So guys, I'm gonna go into my favorite area. I'm gonna talk about my structure and then two lures that I will go after them. And this little area, the structure, more structure cover than the area, is something that might be new to some bass fishermen. And even not just new to the beginning bass fishermen, but your bass fishermen that have been fishing for a long time, I'm talking years, might not understand this type of cover, but it's shell beds. Guys, I love fishing shell beds. It's kind of like that needle in a haystack. Shell beds are kind of formed because of current bringing them in certain areas. And in these areas, there might just be a silt bottom around, a muddy bottom, then all of a sudden you have this different type of hard bottom that brings life. Guys, I can talk about shell beds for 20 to 30 minutes. I've put a video out on Fish the Moment last year in July on going over shell beds. I'll put that link in the description if you want more information on shell beds. But guys, I'm going to talk about two ways to go after these shell beds. And just real quick, shell beds, y'all can be, they're easier to find in rivers, but they are in lakes, okay guys? And so, like I said, so if you're fishing a lake, you're like, hey, I don't know if my lake has shell beds. Hey, there's ways to find out and ways to look for them, but it can be a needle in a haystack. But guys, the reason I love fishing shell beds is because not only can you catch big fish there, but you can catch a lot of fish. And then when you get them fired up on it, gosh, it's a blast and it's fun. But my two ways, okay, my two ways that I like to target these shell beds is going to be with a slower presentation and then more of a reaction presentation. So the first way is with a Magnum trick worm on a Magnum shaky head. Guys, I'm not throwing the finesse little jig head at these dudes, okay? I'm throwing this bigger size jig head, which is this is the 6-inch jig head, has a 7/0 hook right here. I have a couple sizes that they have. I like the heavier sizes more than lighter. This is a Zoom Magnum trick worm, and I got a couple different worms. I like to throw this Zoom Magnum trick worm. I'm starting to throw this Big Bite Baits one this year that's a little longer. It's their finesse worm. It's a little longer than this one, okay? So I'm just trying to see if that little length will get me a couple extra big bites. And then, of course, I have in there the 6-inch worms. I've always thrown this 7-inch Divine Shaky worm, but I just got some of these 9.5 inchers in. I got these for Texas, but I'm about to actually try them down here and see if I can catch some bigger fish with them as well. So guys, these why I like throwing the shaky head, this jig head goes nicely over them shells, and I'm going to drag it and reel it slow over them shells. I'm not going to stop it really. I might pause it for a little bit, but I'm going to drag it along these shells and just have it going down there, okay? Now this worm, I mean, you know, around these shell beds, there's a lot of life. A lot of life. You have not just bait fish and plankton, but you also have brim around some of these shell beds. And that's what I'm trying to mimic with the worm, or I think I am, okay? I'm not actually, we don't know what the fish thinks, but I'm trying to tell myself I'm mimicking a brim or a smaller panfish that's up there, just going through what the shell bed does, a whole little community city of life that it brings. So that's my first way. My second way of targeting shells, now let's say these shells are a little deeper, okay? I'm gonna go into the deeper shells. I got two crankbaits right here. I got a 6-inch, I believe this is the C10. This is more that 5XD style depth range. It's in the chartreuse and a little blue pattern. But then, of course, I have my Spro Little John DD70. This is called their homeboy color. So as you see, they're both chartreuse, but one is more blue on the top and one's more green. But then one's white on the bottom and one's orange. So I have a couple different colors just to see what the fish want in that given day. And so if that shell is a little deeper, this DD70 is going to be my first option. It goes good through them rocks, good through them shells. Man, I've caught a bunch of big fish with these things. Now, just from my experience of fishing shell beds in July, guys, you might not catch as many on the crankbait. Now, if that current's flowing good through there, and you have some current, either some current from the rain or current just from the dam generation, you might catch more fish on these. But typically, guys, these worms are going to get you more bites right now because it's hotter. The fish are, maybe not as aggressive. So you just bringing this down there and just bringing them over them shells, just enticing them to bite. That's why I have more luck with this guy in the summer than the crankbaits. But you cannot rule out the crankbait, because if you do get bit with these, you're going to catch a big one. Now, guys, I'm going to put all my gear in the description, my tackle. I'm using Denali Attacks rods with both of these. I'm using a 7.2 medium heavy with my big worm. I'm using a 7.6 medium with my crankbaits, okay? I also use the Denali Covert Light cranking rod. And, guys, if you are wanting to know more about fishing in July for a pond, I'm going to make a segment here at the end of the video, so you can go check that out. If you're just a straight pond fisherman, you can go check that part out as well.
Hey guys, Kyle Cordiana here with Bass Fishing Declassified. Listen, today I'm going to talk about my favorite bait to fish on lowland reservoirs in the month of July. So, I'm from Oklahoma. One of my favorite lowland reservoirs is Fort Gibson Lake, but we've got Keystone Lake, Lake Eufaula. There's a lot of good lowland reservoirs there. Typically those have kind of stained water, not dirty necessarily, but stained water, and they're relatively shallow fisheries. But in the month of July, those fish are hot, they're offshore for the most part, they're wanting to minimize their effort to feed, so they're going after big baits. And one of my favorite big baits to throw in the month of July is a football jig. I love throwing a football jig. Month of July is a great time to do it. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the jigs that I use, the type of tackle, the trailers, the whole 9 yards. So let's just get right into it. All right, so first I'm going to show you 3 of my favorite jigs to throw. These are all 3 going to be half-ounce football jigs by Motion Fishing. This one's gill candy. Obviously, it imitates a bluegill. It's a really pretty skirt combination. This is going to be rustic craw. Got a lot more oranges and browns in it. This is going to imitate your crawfish, bluegill, crawfish, and shad. Those are kind of the 3 main foragers in lowland reservoirs. But when you're dragging a jig, you're imitating often not a shad, but this is also one of the go-tos. Peanut butter and jelly, PB&J. You really can't go wrong on a lowland reservoir with PB&J. Now, these are some of the crawfish trailers that I like to use. The Yum Christie craw is a go-to for me. If I'm going to use the Yum Christie craw, I love flipping this thing Texas rigged, but this is green pumpkin purple. Obviously, it pairs up really good with the PB&J. Always don't forget, you can get your Yum plastics, get the Christie craws, get the craw chunks over at lurenet.com. Use my coupon code Cordiana15, CORTIANA15. Saves you 15% and you can get it cheaper there than anywhere else. So it helps you and it helps me too. So use your discount code. If you're going to use the Yum Christie craw, you're going to bite it off right there at that top notch. So basically, you're going to take the head off of that dude right there, and now you spit that out and you throw it away somewhere later. But that's going to give you kind of the perfect length for that jig. So you're just going to kind of eyeball it out where you want it, worm it on there, put it nice and center, pop it out right in the head of the crawdad, and slide him up there. And just like that, there is a beautiful half-ounce football jig combination, peanut butter and jelly, green pumpkin purple. Now that's the Christie craw trailer. They've got another craw trailer. This one here is going to give you quite a bit of action. He's really going to flail his arms out there just like that. And then the other trailer that I really like to use if I want to go down a little bit in my profile. So again, this is the gill candy, and this is just a green pumpkin, and this is a craw chunk, a Yum craw chunk. I wanted to get the name right. I'm loving this as a trailer. Not only does it have really good action, and they've got a bigger version, but this is the small size one. I'll show you the big one. I got a big one too. So if you really want a lot of action, you can go for the great big one. But I really like this smaller one here most of the time. And it's really thick and meaty right here. So you're not dealing with this thing sliding down your jig trailer and it tearing up really bad on the hook keeper here. And it's same concept. You don't have to bite this one down. It's ready to go. You just run it right through the middle, rig it up, just like you know how, and slide it up. But there's no biting that down. And there you go, gill candy, green pumpkin, craw chunk trailer, both of those are Yum. This one's ready to go. A lot of times what I like to do is I'll take a pair of scissors on these jigs. Motion Fishing does a good job of leaving these skirts extra long so you can manipulate them as the angler. But I'll take a pair of scissors and I'll literally trim it right there at that hook. So you see where the hook is? I'll take a pair of scissors and I'll just trim the hair of that skirt to where it's still hiding the hook, but it shortens the profile of that body up right to the hook to where it's still hiding the hook. I think that increases your bite ratio as far as getting a hook in them. Not the bite ratio, but increases your hookup ratio by shortening that skirt down to the shank of the hook. So I like to do that. So here's the setup I'm gonna use. I'm gonna tell you what I'm gonna target, what I'm gonna look for, where I'm gonna make these casts and drag this 1/2 ounce football jig. But this is a 7'6", medium heavy Kistler Z-bone. They have a KLX, a Helium model. They're all really good. I love this 4-power, medium heavy Kistler Z-bone. You can also go with a heavy 5-power. Nothing wrong with that at all. This particular 7'6", medium heavy has quite a bit of strength to it, so I really like it. At 7'6", I need it because I'm throwing offshore. I'm targeting offshore fish that are either on rock piles or brush piles. And so I'm bombing it. I'm trying to stay as far away as I can, and I'm gonna work that structure more efficiently and make longer casts with that 7'6" rod. This is a 7:3 to 1 gear ratio. Don't overcomplicate it. 17 to 20 pound fluorocarbon is what I'm gonna throw all the time, every time on a 1/2 ounce football jig. I'm really not gonna alter from that at all. So when I find a rock pile that I'm looking for, or brush pile, I'm looking for those to be on the primary points or secondary points in, you know, big bays, big creeks, big pockets, even main lake points, things like that. That hold a lot of bait. It might have a really good bottom structure to hold crawfish, bluegill, but I'm bombing these out there as far as I can, and I'm trying to work that jig through that brush pile or along those rocks. One of the key things that I like to do is when I've got a good rocky stretch. So in Oklahoma, crawfish is a big deal. I'm dragging these baits, I'm trying to imitate crawfish. A lot of times when people are working a jig for crawfish, they got the rod tip up and they're hopping it. You're hopping it up and hopping it over rocks, and you're pulling it up and over maybe a stick or a brush pile. But most of the time, when I get more bites, I got my rod tip down and I'm dragging that, I'm taking that rod sideways. So if you imagine me in the boat, I got my rod tip down and I'm dragging the jig straight along the bottom, just like a crawfish would if he was just crawling along the bottom. I'm not doing any of this hopping stuff, okay? I'm crawling it, it's getting hung on a rock, and I'm not picking it up. I'm pulling it sideways and forcing it over that rock and letting it crawl along on the bottom. I'm literally doing the whole counting rock thing, but I'm not hopping it. I'm literally slow dragging it, getting it stuck, and just pulling it till it pops free. It's got a big weed guard on here. Most of the time, that football head will just come out of that rock and dart. It'll look just like a crawfish darting, but the crawfish is staying on the bottom. If you ever tried to chase a crawfish down and catch it with your hands, they don't go up and down. That's not what they do, right? They go and they dart away from you. So by keeping your rod tip down and dragging it through those rocks, you're gonna get a lot more bites. Obviously in brush, you're gonna have to drag it up and over. But if you're throwing this on rocks, it's one of my key tips for you guys. Try dragging that along rocks, and I think you'll get a lot more bites that way. I think I covered everything, so I hope this tip helps you guys catch some more fish, and we'll see you guys in the next one.
Really quick, guys, Bass Fishing Declassified is brought to you by Fish the Moment. And we just want to say thank you guys for watching. And one way that you can help support Bass Fishing Declassified is by checking out our membership options, but also by going to fishthemoment.com, checking out our virtual lessons. If you'd like to have a one-on-one virtual lesson with any of our members from the Bass Fishing Declassified team, sign up and give it a chance. We also have our lake map breakdowns that has been popular throughout the years. And then you have the sonar settings guides done by Johnny Schultz himself. Once again, we appreciate you guys watching. Let's go see what the next angler's top area and bait is.
Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to another edition of Bass Fishing Declassified, and thanks for tuning in for today's episode. Much appreciated. Today I'm going to give you guys what is my favorite way to catch bass in the summertime, talk about the areas, talk about the technique and the bait, and hopefully help you guys catch some good fish this summer. So anyway, right off the bat, guys, my favorite way to catch bass in the summertime is on a walking topwater. This is the Mega Bass Diamante. This is my favorite one to use. It's a walking bait, walks back and forth like this. And guys, in the summertime of the year, there's not a better way to catch shallow bass than on this Diamante. So one of the big keys with this is you can catch them in a lot of different scenarios. low light conditions. Most people associate topwater like with early in the morning and late in the evening, but for the technique that I like to use in the summertime, this is an all-day deal because I'm focusing on spawning perch, spawning bluegill type areas. So if you're not familiar with it, guys, perch and bluegill, red ear sunfish, black perch, pumpkin seeds, all those type of sunfish, they will spawn all summer long as that water temperature is like above 70 degrees. So they'll spawn from May into September. And this keeps a population of the bass shallow in most lakes across the country. And they live there. They live there hunting and feeding on these shallow perch and spawning bluegill that are up shallow all year long. And the walking topwater like the Diamante is the #1 choice for me to catch them. So what I'm looking for in this scenario is I'm looking for flat coves. It's the same type of places where you look for the bass spawning in the springtime of the year. So if you've got some areas where you know the bass spawn at, go back into those same areas, and this is where the bluegill are going to be spawning. One of the areas they like to spawn is like the back 2/3 of a cove, especially if you got some shady bank on it. So if you've got like some overhanging trees or maybe some type of cover in the water that's putting off some shade, those are prime areas for bluegill to spawn. Now, if you're in a lake that has cleaner water, like visibility of over 3 feet, you can actually see these perch beds back there. And they bed like in little honeycomb areas. They make the beds about this big around, and they make a bunch of them close together. And they're real obvious to see, and you can see perch swimming all over them. And this is where you want to throw the walking topwater like the Diamante in there. Just throw it back in there, cover water, try to target sort of that 1 to 4 foot zone. And the way I like to do it is I'll shut my boat down about 2/3 of the way back in the cove. I'll work my way all the way to the back of the cove and out the other side, and then just go on to the next one. You don't necessarily have to see the spawning perch to catch these fish, because what happens is the bass will hunt these areas all summer long. So a bass, for example, when it swims into an area, it doesn't know if there's any perch swimming in there or not. It's just hunting and looking for them. So you can still catch bass on the walking topwaters all day long, even if you can't see any visible beds. Now, visible beds do help, because once a bass locates an area where there's some spawning perch, they live around that area. And it's not like they go in there and they eat everything at once. They'll go up in there and they'll pick a perch off, and then maybe the next day they go pick another perch off. But they hang around those areas all the time. Now, most of the time I'm fishing this usually on anywhere between 15 to 20 pound test monofilament line. I like that Mega Bass 110 special rod, which is a little less than 7 foot long, medium action, gets the good action on the Diamante, and just working it sort of like just a medium walk and retrieve. Nothing special, nothing fancy about it. And the good thing about this, like I said, guys, you don't have to get out of bed at 5 o'clock in the morning to catch a topwater fish. This is something that you can get bit on all day long, all summer long. I don't care if it's 100 degrees out with no sun or whatever. It's just my favorite way to catch them. So if you're like me and you don't like getting out there and fishing deep all summer, get you a couple of these Diamantes, get back in those coves, and you catch some good fish. See y'all next time.
All right, everybody, so it's summertime, and one of my favorite types of cover that you can pretty much find on every single lake around the country has got to be docks. Docks are just so good. They provide a ton of shade. They provide a ton of cover for both the prey fish and for largemouth, smallmouth, and spots. And they're just overall a great type of cover. And the great thing is that you can find them pretty much on any lake around the country. And so one of my favorite things to do is to just kind of look at my mapping. You know, I look at my Navionics mapping either on my graph or on my phone or my iPad, and I look for those areas that have docks, but not just any docks. Docks, you know, there's a lot of docks that just don't produce, but I look for docks that are around or on the type of banks that I would expect to see the fish during that time of year. You know, for instance, during the spring, I'm going to be looking for docks that are kind of in the backs of the creeks near where the fish are going to spawn. But during the summertime, I'm going to be looking for those docks on main lake structure, main lake points, channel bends, just any type of main lake structure where those fish have deep water access. Those can be very, very good docks. But I also don't overlook the ones that are also shallow on the main lake either, because when you have docks that are on very, very steep deep structure, sometimes that gives the bass the opportunity to go deeper and to kind of, explore a little bit more. But if you have like one dock out there on a shallow flat on the main lake, there's likely going to be a fish on it because that's the only piece of cover for that fish on that flat. So it really just depends. There's no hard set answer to what docks are going to produce on any given lake or any given area on a lake. But one of the common things that I really find when it comes to fishing docks is I can catch a fish off a dock on a jig just about any time. This right here is my favorite presentation for most dock fishing, especially if I have a little bit more stain or dirty water. This right here is the Z-Man cross eyes flipping jig. And this thing right here is kind of like that traditional Arky style head, and it's really good for skipping under docks and also doing some flipping around dock posts and things like that. I pair that with I really like the new Helicross from Z-Man. That's a really good trailer. It's got a lot of action and just overall very, very lifelike craw style bait. And as far as the tackle that I'm going to be using, it's not like my traditional flipping setup where I'm using a 7/6 heavy action rod. I still use a heavy action rod because I feel like you need a good solid backbone to get a good hook set with a jig. This is a 7/3 heavy action all-purpose series rod from Fitzgerald, and I like this one. It's a little bit more nimble to be able to skip this jig, and also do some flipping and pitching and get some good leverage. So it's a good all-around rod for skipping and pitching around docks. The line that you use is really important. I never use braided line around docks. Number one, if you make a bad pitch and it goes over, some wood on a dock, somewhere on the dock, it's probably going to dig in there and you're going to have to go retrieve your bait because it's really, really, braid just tends to dig into wood. So I really like using fluorocarbon. This is 22-pound test Seaguar Tatsu, and this is the type of line that I like to use for any type of hardcover. Rocks, docks, wood, that is my standard line, is a good heavy fluorocarbon line. And as far as the reel, I'm going to be using an 8.1-to-1 gear ratio VLD10 for more efficiency. But anyways, that is the setup that I like to throw around docks, and docks are an absolutely must-try type of cover during the summertime all around the country.
Okay guys, if you're a big pond fisherman and you want some tips for fishing ponds in July, guys, I remember fishing ponds when I was young, and I still fish them here and there. But I know we have some people that watch the channel and man, just fish ponds. So I'm just gonna give you a couple tips of what to look for and to think about in July, okay? So when you have a pond, you gotta first understand the type of cover that's in the pond. Is it spring fed? Is there a pump out there that's generating even water, a fountain? Because there was one pond that I grew up fishing that was on a golf course, at a fountain out there, and guys, that fountain was creating oxygen, and in July those fish lived around it. I mean, we would make a cast as far as we could to get to this fountain, and if we made that cast of about 120 feet, I'm talking throw as far as you can, we were getting bit, okay? So just some things to think about. Now, of course, the fountain, let's just put that out of the picture. Let's not just talk about that. But let's say, one thing to think about in July is shade. You have to understand the position of the sun and how it's putting structure on your pond for shade, okay? So I'm not going to get more into like, hey, throw a frog or throw this lure or that lure. It's just more of looking at like, hey, think of that pond, look at where that sun is at, and then understanding the shade, because the fish are going to use the shade. Let's say your pond has a lot of grass, a lot of submergent hydrilla, milfoil type of grass. They will get in that, and then they will use the shade as either to stay cool or to target their prey. So you just need to understand that, like, hey, where are these shade lines affecting, okay? Also, guys, there's going to be a brim spawn still going on in July. And of course, depending on your pond, most ponds do not just have a lot of bait fish thrown in them, right? Unless you have a special pond that they're stocking bait. But there's going to be potentially panfish in your pond. And guys, so you need to then go try to find them brim beds and try to see where those brim beds are looking. You can use sunglasses and walk across the bank. I'll put my sunglasses in the description, guys. I use Waterland sunglasses. I don't have them on right now, but I'll put those in the description and have a code if you want to try to get you a pair and get you a % off. But look for them brim beds. Brim beds, you know, they're going to need a hard bottom. There could be a sand bottom, and they're going to use that so them bass will kind of stay in the area. Okay, if your pond has docks, that's an easy shade line. If there's overhanging trees, hey, see how that shade positions on your pond. If you know if you know the ditch in the pond, guys, if you know there's a certain deeper section, see if them fish are using that certain periods of the day to sit in before they come up to feed. Just back from an experience, I remembered an overhead shade line that was at a pond that I fished, and it was across the pond, like it was all trees, bushes. You couldn't really climb and fish the bank over there, but you could throw across. And man, we would throw across that thing, and we would try to land like almost in the tree at times or under the tree on the bank, bring it into the pond, and man, we would get bit. It was just crazy how them fish are using them ponds, because if the pond is just a sitting body of water, that water is going to get hot. It's shallower, guys, it's going to get hot, so those fish are going to try to find ways to cool off. 2 more tips on fishing ponds, guys. One thing I like to do when I'm fishing even in my lakes, okay, is I like to be a little different, okay? So if you have a pond, and I know all ponds are different, like they're just like lakes, but some ponds they want flukes, some ponds they want frogs, some ponds they want a Texas rig, but I try to be different. So hey, here's some dip and glow guy. This is the garlic dip and glow guy. They have other kind of colors, whatever, you know. I have the this chartreuse red and orange in my boat that I use at my lakes. I actually forgot to talk about this in my first segment on fishing shell beds, so if you're still watching this, you get it. But I love to dip my tails in this chartreuse. Now guys, one more little tip, okay, is understanding your surrounding area around the pond, as in, you know, I mentioned earlier that panfish are typically in it, but let's say at night, or let's say you're walking around the pond and you do hear a lot of frogs, okay? Well, that might mean that, hey, you might need to be throwing a frog. That means those fish are eating frogs, potentially your big fish. That's just a little tip I know on a couple lakes nearby that I fish, that, hey, these frogs are starting to get out. Some of you guys might even go out and frog gig at night, go, you know, go do that thing and have some fun. But I do have a lake nearby. I was talking about a lake, that them frogs in August, they kind of start getting out and you start hearing them more. And guys, them big fish eat frogs. And that's the same with ponds, okay? If you know, you have a pond, like I know of a pond right now that they will not hit a frog in. And that's a chance that there's just not no frogs around it, maybe. I've walked around that pond, never heard the frogs make their noise or, you know, see the bank. So they don't eat a frog. Those fish there just don't mess with it. But if you hear them frogs and you're seeing them along the bank, hey, remember that hey, I might need to have me a walking plastic frog on, or a popping frog, or go get you a Zoom horny toad and get you a ribbit and go swim your frog. Hey guys, hopefully this helps. Let me know if it does, and we'll see you in the next one.